where did you start at? Were you Yahoo in the beginning?
I actually started, really, if we even take a step further back, it was really Sun Microsystems at the time. In the 1990s, when Sun Microsystems was really the leading technology company at that time, and of course, building the hardware that went into data centers, predominantly, most of the hardware that went to data centers.
D. Nelson.
That's right. D. Nelson came from there, along with, Mark Monroe and a lot of other, I would say, really kind of key people from the data, that ultimately went into the data center industry. And I really helped to really kind of start building out our data centers and labs, our internal data centers and labs.
Sun
Microsystems. That was in the late 90s. And at that time, I was part of what we called the major energy users group. And it was really all the big technology companies in Silicon Valley. So it was HP and IBM. And at the time, we didn't have Google and Yahoo, and those companies weren't really around. But obviously, there was a couple of data center companies, and I became the leader of that group, which was all these big energy users group. And we ultimately we kind of saw the writing on the wall that California was going to have a power crisis, right, forthcoming. And we started banging that drum about a year before, and ultimately, I got hired by Exodus Communications, which of them, right?
Yes.
That was really kind of the start.
Explain who they were. They were the genesis of this industry. Them
Without
and Savas, right? And there's how many talented people, I always talk about how Digital Realty Trust has populated more C-suites in this industry than any other company, right? And maybe I'm wrong, but I'd say, it depends on the month or maybe, the quarter, you could challenge me, but there's a lot of former digital alumni. But if you look back on the enterprise side, most of those people came from the Exodus and Savas days, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Look at Kava
at that time,
Furlong.
Exodus Communications provided over a third of the world's internet traffic through its data centers, right? We had over 60 data centers in the year 2000 around the globe. I think it was 65, right? But you think about that. In the year 2000, for one company to have 65 data centers around the globe was phenomenal. That's right. And I remember the CEO tasking me with, I want to say it was about a $1.5 billion CapEx spend over 6 months. We were only an $850 million a year revenue company at the time.
Still massive at the time.
But that's right, very big for that time. And obviously big spends, everything else. And we were building these data centers that were 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 megawatts each, which that was really big for that time again. And the company hired me to solve the power problem because all these utilities balked every time that we came to a town, whether it's Frankfurt or Berlin or London, wherever it was, right, Dublin, and we'd say we want 10 plus megawatts. They would say no way.
They would say no, you don't need it, or no, you can't have it, or no, you're not going to use it.
They would question that we even ever needed that.
Yeah.
Right. That was step number one that I had to work through. So I had to work up these really close relationships with the utilities to really help them understand that we were legitimate business, we were real,
sure,
right, and this load was real and it was growing, and that we ultimately did need that because otherwise they were just questioning it. They didn't want to spend the capital to build out, transmission lines and substations, and of course, generation assets behind all that to support a load that was never going to materialize, right? So there was a lot of challenges with that, and also at the time, a 10 megawatt load was a really big load,
yes,
right? At that time, it was either a paper mill, an aluminum smelter, a steel mill, and maybe like a big oil refinery or some other petrochemical kind of industrial process. That's right. Like other than that, nobody had loads of that size.
Right.
And here we are again now 25 plus years later, and we're in the same boat, but now data centers are starting to actually even, I would say, trump or lead, right, even some of those other industries in really total capacity. Yeah, it's going to be great.
We're building hundreds of megawatts.
That's designed for Bitcoin.
That's designed specifically for Bitcoin. And this will sound, a little bit crazy, but, the power densities we're doing now on HPC, we're actually stepping down from the Bitcoin power densities, right? Obviously significantly up, but
so we're traditional data center.
We built over a 2-year time frame almost 500 megawatts of Bitcoin data centers. And I don't know if you've seen any of these facilities.
I haven't seen yours, but I've been in a few.
Okay. So
they typically have no engines. They don't have, it's street power to a panel transformer and then feed and right to distributions, typically some sort of glycol or dialectic fluid or mineral oil immersion, if not some incredible permutation that requires a lot of water, heat jacket.
The vast majority of what you'll see is just none of that even.
Really?
Air cool.
Really?
So you're just moving.
What's the density capabilities at air cool that you could have?
You're still running higher power density.
Like 50, 60 kW?
Think of, so our facilities, especially North Dakota, which is much easier to do air cool.
Sure.
You basically have a roof and then a filter wall and then a wall, and both of the walls open up besides the filters, and you're just blowing all the way
natural cold air in there, fish bowling.
Yeah, but there's no, it's not like you're piping it around. You just need as much as possible. But these things are pretty rugged. So so we're building those, and the idea was, Kirk, if you want to be a Bitcoin miner, you come to me. I'll help you buy machines. You buy machines, put them in our facility. We run it, Bitcoin hits your wallet, right? And then we'll just dock your wallet for your fees, for your data center fees. And so anyone could mine Bitcoin at scale. And so you could get kind of those economies of scale. What practically happened was we signed up, 3 industrial scale miners. So we signed up the hyperscalers in Bitcoin. And we built this almost 500 megawatts in 2 years, which it's not nearly what we're building now, but still putting online, 500 megawatts in that time frame, pretty tough to do.
You just don't know what's going to happen when you introduce technology to society. Right?
Yeah, I think there's flaws and there's been consequences of everything. I think we're headed in a direction that some of that will be regulated, but so much of the fourth industrial revolution, you can't regulate without regulating people's civil rights. It's gotten really sticky and complicated. 100%.
And that governance is...
We need some governance. We need some legislation.
Policy.
We absolutely do. I don't know where that's going to come from. Spencer and I have a few ideas. But I
it's
think
emerging.
I think it is emerging. And I think that the powerful thought leaders in this industry are starting to come together more and walk away from feeling that there is a competition constantly.
Are you hopeful for the future with all this stuff?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's going to take a collaboration that we're not seeing yet amongst the people that are making the big decisions.
We haven't evolved there yet.
Yeah.
Well, so the gas and power markets are off, right? So the power market's midnight to midnight, and the gas market's 9 a.m. to 9 a.m. And obviously, gas is the marginal driver of fuel, or marginal fuel driver in power. And so in almost every market, that's what's going to drive your marginal price. In the Northeast, there's some nuances in the fact that we still actually roll back to oil because that market's so pipeline constrained. And you have some markets like Alberta where wind's actually sitting on the margin, which is really almost impossible to budget. But for the most part, if you look at almost every, and especially this time of year, if you look at every market in North America, gas is going to be the marginal driver of fuel.
Natural gas?
Natural gas.
Okay.
And so those are the, peaking plants that can turn on, turn off. And that's what I think on a macro level, people don't understand is like the grid's literally balanced every several seconds, right? And you always have to have exactly as much power as, generating as being consumed. And anytime that gets out of balance at all, everything falls apart. And so that's what the whole frequency response is about, is it's got to stay right there at 60 hertz or everything goes to hell in a handbasket because that's where a grid, Europe's 50 hertz. But so that balance is constantly going on. And forever, people ignored it. If you think about it's going back a ways, but 50 years ago, like a power outage was a nuisance, right? Now it's catastrophic.
Yeah.
All sorts of things are based on data. The internet, cell modems and all this stuff, when all that stuff starts to crash, it's really a catastrophic thing now where it was much more of let's light some candles and how long is this going to last? And so that's the big change. And so, obviously you have very different markets across the US. You have regulated, you have deregulated, you have different fuel mixes, different regulations, different pricing metrics. And so, that's kind of part of what makes this whole thing seem so nebulous and confusing to people. And that's really kind of what we're trying to demystify, is really understanding, what you're doing as a customer and then what's going on in the market. And that's the reality. Like we'd forever kind of in the brokerage side of the business, customers say, hey, my bill almost doubled this month. What happened? I was like, your usage almost doubled. What'd you do? I don't know. And so until you really understand volumetric risk on your side, and then more importantly, how much of that volumetric risk can you actually do something about, right? And this is why data centers have, N+1 generation is they don't take volumetric risk. And so, but until you understand those things, and this is kind of the whole, electric vehicles adding a significant load to a house, which changes things, you got to understand that. And that's why residential customers pay this massive premium compared to a commercial or even an industrial customer, is an industrial customer is much closer to the market. And so, when everything fell apart in, Uri in Texas, the industrial customers are the ones where you saw just massive swings in bills, where customers, on the residential side were out of power and had a fixed rate, and it wasn't financially catastrophic unless they were doing something nuanced, which Texas now eliminated. And so that's the complexity that that's really kind of the genesis of what Legend was founded to do. And
to bring that back to go forward into the data center market, I mentioned Moy had been working with US clients since the mid 1990s, and in the early 2000s, first two hyperscale data center clients came to town. And they were working very much in the Dublin region. And Moy got an opportunity on phase 3 of one of those. So in 2004, on phase 3 of one of those projects, to work with the client, because we'd worked with an architectural practice who was working with them. We'd just finished a project with them. The product they were originally going to supply didn't become available because of a problem that the client had with the product. I'm not saying there was a problem with the product, but it opened a door for us. And we were asked, look, can you do this data center project? Do you have FM Global approvals? And can you supply material to site in about 2 to 3 weeks? Yes, and yes.
You just need that opportunity.
Yeah. And then we continued so we worked with that client continuously and many more in Ireland. So at the time when I moved to London first, I was trying to look for those type of opportunities, or even to talk about US clients in that manner, hoping that would be our niche, as you call it, and we talk about it being the same. It wasn't really there until 2013, when a UK builder had been awarded a project in the Netherlands for a client that we had already worked with in Dublin, with an architect we had already worked with in Dublin. And we were asked to do the design and specification for the roof package. So that opened up a whole new door. And the bit that's important to go back and say, I suppose, is that originally in 1990s and to early 90s, when we were working on pharmaceutical and then data center called critical infrastructure projects, we probably didn't. We knew we were looking after the client. We knew we had to think about what they were doing, but we didn't think about it as a different sector. You know what I mean? It was another big square box
industrial, commercial project.
It was. Why we were continuously used, in my opinion, was because we zero water ingress was critical to us, which is obviously critical to a critical infrastructure client and a mission critical client. So that kind of carried over, kept us on that project for a number of years, and then was the catalyst to us getting involved in that project in Europe. So what I found quite quickly was I've been working really, really hard for 3 years to build up to get a certain level of turnover in the UK. I had 3 or 4 staff at that stage. And I got that same level of turnover matched in one project in 1 year in a different country, because we were valued, because that client and that chain of construction management team said, we want this company in there because we value what they
predictable product
and the service. Yeah. So very quickly I said, right, okay, I was talking to people and looking at that, critical infrastructure and mission critical. And I was like, right, where else are they building these? What are they doing? And so that's when I decided to really try and learn more about the sector and the industry that is data centers. And as I'm involved, as I think with Host in Ireland and Gary Conley, who talks an awful lot, and the US and European networks, and he'll talk about the where data, when data, why data, who data, etc. So I really wanted to immerse myself and understand, what are these buildings? What are they doing? So this is 2013-14. What are they doing in there? Why is our roof important? How can we be of assistance further than just supplying a roof? So I'll often talk about, my aim is for us to be anything from paracetamol to penicillin for a client when it comes to the design of their building envelope and the pain that it could possibly cause. It might be just something tiny. You mentioned putting a solar panel on a roof. That's paracetamol, right? How do we get around that? That's easy. It could be, if a 20-year-old roof or a 10-year-old roof and someone's just cut a massive hole in it to put in a new AHU, and now I've just shut down a colo for a month and I'm losing millions. Sure. So that's more on the penicillin, or maybe they need something stronger just to take away the feeling of the pain, because the pain isn't going to go away just yet. So I submersed myself in that. And then the other bit that you were talking about earlier is, offered a service to those clients. Then the GC was working on another project. Architectural practice was moving somewhere else. Another architectural practice moved into phase 2. Then before I knew it, we were working on a project in Denmark, and then we're in Sweden, and then we're in Germany, and then we're in Belgium. And
then you're moving.
Before you know it, you're in 10 countries, individual projects, but each project, has great opportunity for value but repeat opportunity for service-led business. And that's really where I suppose my data center career started, as I call that part of it, because what I said internally in the company is, look, yeah, we are roofing specialists, but I want to be seen as data center specialists. I want these people to look at us and say, these guys get what we're building, why we're building, and the magnitude of the problem if there's waterproof.
So you knew early that because there was a data center gold rush of Ireland, which is what shut down Ireland's power, right? Was it AirGrid? Mm-hmm. And AirGrid just a few years ago was like, we're putting a moratorium here because everybody went there to build data centers. And you must have just been seeing the explosive growth of the industry from the front row of Ireland, right?
Yeah, I mean, you already had the flat market, Frankfurt, London, Amsterdam, Paris, and then -D for Dublin. And Dublin became that next market, and everybody wanted to come there. It was tax efficient. We were getting stuff built quick and built well. We tend not to turn away business. When people come to our country and want to do business, whatever they want to do, we'll, providing it's legal and we can do it, we will do it. We will get it done. So we saw that, and we started working with multiple clients there as well. You saw a lot more co-location clients coming to town. But then we talked earlier about the data center ecosystem. The Irish data center ecosystem just grew so much. So when for example, that first job I was doing in the Netherlands in 2014, when you went to a pub, 10 minutes away from the site in the local town in the evening time, it was full of Irish people and English people who were designing and building this data center. There wasn't many Dutch people. There's a handful, and there's a lot more now, Dutch people and German people who are involved in data centers, huge amount, doing a phenomenal job. But at that time, a lot of the projects, because why? Well, why were we able to do a job in the Netherlands? American clients, we had built with them before. They saw Netherlands as another state in Europe, and we designed and built for the English language to US criteria and European criteria. Check, 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 check. We could do all that.
I think it's really important for people to realize what we take for granted now as a standard was never once a standard, right? It was, let's try this and let's try this and let's try this. And as you were doing this, because it is iterative, right? How we crawl, walk, run in this industry. I want people to appreciate, like, you had to take some big risks, I'm sure, back in the days where you were trying to deploy at large scale new methods of doing things that maybe were the first time that people were trying that. Is that right?
Yes. And let me be clear. You are going to fail more than you succeed, right? Just like a baseball batter who can hit, 300, those folks make tens of millions of dollars. Well, 7 out of 10 times they will go to bat, they hit nothing.
Well, think about it like this, and to put it in your context, one of the greatest Edmonton Oilers of all time is obviously Wayne Gretzky. Didn't score 100% of his shots he took, right? Even the greatest, the GOATs like him, still didn't bat 1,000, right? Jordan didn't bat 1,000, Babe Ruth didn't bat 1,000, right? So you're going to have to get used to taking risk and failing if you're going to really, truly be a pioneer.
For us, story 2010, I think the date was June 12th, and I'll take the full brunt of the accountability and responsibility for this. We had a massive data center failure in Virginia with AWS, right? And AWS was just formative, and James Hamilton was like, we cannot take these outages because it's going to really drive the industry into a place that it doesn't need to be, which is it won't exist, right? So we went through, and there was an engineering flaw that went by the team, and I had the team. I headed the team up, right? And I tell this story because I've had the fortune of working with some just super intelligent people on my team, in there, trying to make sure that I didn't get fired for the event. Did all they could to try to put responsibility of the event on somebody else, and they provided me with just a ton of data that I was going to present to the outage folks, which included, the Charlie Bells, the Bezoses, the Andy Jassis. I mean, these are bigwig DeSantis's bigwig in the industry, right? And what the team didn't know that I'd already written my resignation letter because I had to take responsibility for the event.
Sure.
If it was in my team, I was the ultimate leader of that team, and no matter how much, and they worked through weekends to try to put together a story. And smart people always put together a smart story. So they gave me the data. I went through the data, and I said, "Yeah, this is great. Thanks. I'll present it on Wednesday." Wednesday came around. I had a pile of papers. Amazon is a reading, writing culture. Everything is thoughts put on paper, which is brilliant, not a PowerPoint. So I took it all and put it in the trash, right? And then when I had to present, it's like, this is all on us. We missed.
Yeah, the design was wrong from the jump, and you fixed it. And like that's how you learn. You have to fall on your face.
And I said, so this is. There's nothing to discuss here. We're fixing it. Here's our schedule for making sure, because it was design flaw that percolated through our entire global facilities. This is the schedule of fixing it. This is what it'll cost. This is the amount of time that we'll spend.
You're allowed to be wrong sometimes. And obviously they didn't sack you, it sounds like.
No, well, they didn't. I sat down with Jerry and Andy and said, "Hey, listen, this is my bad after the meeting. Here's my resignation. I'm sorry."
And what'd they say?
They said, "You broke it, you fixed it."
Okay.
Right? You broke it, you fixed it. They took that resignation letter, ripped it, put it in the garbage, and said, "Come back to us when it's done."
Okay, cool. That actually is a huge part about culture. I always tell people, I'm like, you got to be inspired by what you're doing. And I do believe it's not, the difference between a manager and a leader is a leader typically inspires, right? They have the ability to inspire others to do better, right? And you're going to have moments where you're just going to have major setbacks. And I say that for us to be able to maximize the output and productivity of people on our team, they have to be inspired, but they have to feel safe from failure, right? And safe to ask questions. And if you could do those two things and they could go home fulfilled every day, then you've achieved a healthy culture that maximizes output and productivity. Do you feel that that's something that you were able to achieve?
I believe so, right? Like, I mean, and as you mentioned, right, clearly you've done homework on me. I'm not someone that is going to be adored by everybody, right? And
most leaders are polarizing, and I don't know any that haven't pioneered this industry that haven't stepped on a few toes along the way, and myself included, right? So you're going to be disruptive as you're a change agent. There's no apologies necessary for that stuff. And we talked about that the first time we talked. I'm like, listen, you could talk to 10 people about Kirk O'Fell, and 5 of them will love me and 5 of them will hate me. It's the same for Oz. It's the same for, there are other people that 9 out of 10 people are going to love him, like Christian Bellotti. He's a different kind of monster than people. Everybody's just a little bit different, and that's okay. Don't you agree?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Right. And I think my teams, right, I hope that, the one things that they can say is I'm transparent. Like, where you're sitting every minute that you're sitting in front of me.
I think that's something that people have always admired and respected. You always know where you stand with Oz. That's the first part that people are like, how is it? They're like, you always know where you stand with it. But that's a good thing.
I believe it is.
I like that. I'm all about it.
I'm short on words, and often, often I get criticized on my emails, maybe too short. I don't start with a long diatribe. It's like, hey, we need to get this done, or hey, good job here, right? I one of the things that I tell everybody is I respond to everything, right? Like if you reach out to me, I will respond. It may not be media, but as I dig through whatever it is, I happen to be, circling on at that time. But so for me, the teams, I think the teams appreciate the directness mostly. Right. And it's a two-way street. You need to be direct with me. You're not going to hurt my feelings. If you tell me I suck, it's like, okay, well, great. Thanks. I suck. Can you tell me why? Because, that's a statement that I can't really go after. And maybe
at the end of
the day, again, right, because everything goes back to hockey. There's a little blurb that I see this guy. He's a bit of a joker on YouTube, and he's always playing a men's league. He's always drunk, and he gives up a goal, and the little YouTube thing, he comes back, and his captain goes and he goes, "You just have to do better." And then he looks at him, he goes, "I don't know, man. I don't think that's I can't really work with that. Like, do better. Like, what do you want me to do? Like, what part of better do you want me to do? You want me to skate harder? You want me to shoot more? Like, just do better seems like really non-actionable." And I love that, right? Because, if you start out, you need to do better. It's like, okay, great. Tell me how, you don't need to suck. Tell me what that means. Tell me where you think I suck. And maybe I'll agree with you. It's like, you're right. I'm not going to be your huggy, person. I'm not going to be, like I will. Though I don't take compliments easy. I always, it's always like, I get a little bit, like it just doesn't make me feel good, but I give them out easy.
Sure.
Right. And I prefer to give them out than to receive them. Right. So for me, if you have anything that you bring to the table, like if you bring a problem, right. And my boss now, Jeff Gordon, is very good for that. He if you bring him a problem and you don't give him options for a solution, I don't want to hear it. He absolutely doesn't want to hear. He says, don't come to me with a problem without having to first thought out of what it looks like to go to green on this problem. I won't listen to it. And he cuts you off, which I love. Other people find that like super not very respectful. It's like, yeah, you brought him a problem. Like you expect him to fix it because you just started. It's like, I have a problem and I expect you to fix it.
Listen, one of the things that I think I saw from the outside looking in is I didn't see Amazon as a cult. I definitely saw it as a closed loop where it seemed like a very, the people that worked there, they were the least prevalent at conferences. They were just grinding. They weren't out. Like conferences are boondoggles, but there's a lot of value in the networking aspect. The social dynamic, I think, is really important to network with your peers and colleagues. And I do think that as long as you have the right content, not what's going on in this industry and how people are doing things, but if you focus with leaders talking about why changes are taking place, then everybody else could fall within orbit of that why, right? Their means and methods or their what's and hows will align themselves to why the industry is changing. People like you were there was probably times where no one was probably building as much or as fast as you guys were for a little bit of time there, I'm imagining, right? Until some of the other ones, then it became a big race, like an arms race of data centers between you and the other larger hyperscales. But tell me about some of the things that were externally and internally motivating to you and where you guys were going to collect growth capital. When I say growth capital, I don't mean from finance. I mean, what were you doing to evolve and learn during the time to stay on the top of your game so that as you're in charge of leading this huge development of AWS cloud data center capacity, what were you doing? Where were you drawing your information from? Where were you getting information for validation so you weren't making changes or making bad designs that put, things at risk? Where were you going to get educated?
Interesting enough, I think the education, we didn't go to conferences, and I still don't go to conferences.
You're coming to mine.
Yeah, I did because you guys reached out, right? I've attended one conference in the past 10 years, right? And that was just with Digital Realty because I wanted to push some innovation that we were driving forward. And that was the only reason. And then I just found that, like a little uncomfortable. And to me, Amazon was kind of the perfect animal because it didn't, it didn't fawn over you if you were going to conferences. Like during one of my promotions on Microsoft's, like how many conferences have I attended? Well, that's going to be a problem because number 0, if this is going to be like going to take me to the next step, it's not happening, and I'm not just built like that. So to me, Amazon was a good place. We actually did a lot of it and we tried to not, this is going to sound weird, but we didn't want to be biased. Right. So, and we missed some opportunities in maybe not seeking out. Like we always looked up to the Googles because of their commitment to sustainability. Everything that they did, they really did. I mean, they, like even now, right? They do something, they go in, feet first, right? Like what's innovative? Well, they've kind of gone through and in the industry, a thought is that they're going to a 480 volt distribution flat across the data center floor. Well, how does that help? Well, that helps, like one of the issues that you're going to have is 277 volt to neutral, phase to neutral current, which means that all your power supplies are going to have to be good for at least 300 volt in all those servers. Well, that's super smart. Why? Well, it's an incremental cost on the power supplies, but it takes an entire layer of distribution out of your data center floor, which is all your PDUs. They go out the door. So now you have 480 volt distribution for your servers and all your mechanical electrical equipment. That's it. So you need,
standardization. what was the application? Was it in the finance industry? Like who was buying this technology that?
It was oil industry, finance, anyone that needed centralized computing. And so for HP, it was really at that point became kind of, a mix what customers would buy. And that's why they had to get the high end, because a customer may buy one or two of these things and then buy all the other ones that are integrated, the smaller workstations and things like that back then, the PCs.
Who were the architects, so to speak, back in those days that were trying to figure out how they were going to design for a solution if you had a requirement set that someone had to solve for from an IT perspective? But somehow, I'm guessing future-proofing in those days wasn't what they were thinking about, because they didn't understand how fast things would evolve or grow. But
certainly they didn't.
So what were you seeing back in those days? People were just kind of like Band-Aid here, Band-Aid there, Band-Aid there.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Well, certainly I think there's some strategy, right? Because they are looking at buying create a high-end division for HP. Convex became their high-end division. Right. So there were some strategic aspects, realizing that there needs to be some broader thing architected. But at that time, the data centers were chaos in the 90s.
What were they back in those days? Because it was Savis and Exodus. Who all was around?
Well, yeah, Exodus in the mid 90s. I don't even think Exodus was around yet. Right. In fact, most of the data centers were enterprise.
Okay.
Right. And so it was on-prem.
Yeah.
And, I remember Chris Malone and we would be, well, let me just say what actually got us there in the first place. So here we're building these high-end computers, and, as my dad has always taught me about, is always be curious beyond the boundaries you're responsible for. I would start looking at these huge, they were refrigerator-sized servers. It was Half Dome. It was the server we were shipping at the time. But we weren't thinking about how does this impact the customer's environment. And some of the customers
That's their problem. They're just buying it.
Yeah. It was back then the industry was throw it over the fence.
Put it in a closet.
And they would put it somewhere. And so we started going around to customers. Chris and I, we've developed these best practices.
How are you using these? You're trying to figure out how they were doing them.
And the stuff we saw, it was laughable. Chris and I had such a good time. We traveled all over the world to many data centers. Sometimes I would go by myself. Sometimes he would go by himself. Sometimes we would go together. The account teams really liked having us, and we developed like the 10 best practices of good data center design. And it was things like hot aisle, cold aisle, how to design your floor tiles. Back then it was so basic. I'm sure
there wasn't an uptime that defined a standard or a criterion to that standard of any kind. Not yet.
Not yet. Right.
It was a Wild West. So how did you know what you were doing was the right thing to do?
I had no idea. You just do it.
Okay.
Right.
Plug it in, do a CFD model on it.
But you go and you see these customers, and they have raised floors that are 4 inches high, and they're having problem with distributing air, and we're looking at it going, okay, that's another best practice. Let's make sure it's
12 inches.
It's something else, right? And so we developed these things, and we went around all over the world looking at these data centers, and they were horrible. People were having hot racks blown into the front of other racks. It was absolute chaos.
I remember those days.
Yeah.
2000s. Yeah.
Yeah. Even in 2000 still.
Yeah. They were
right?
still ugly.
They were still ugly. Right. And I remember in 2000, we were still going around. And so that was a fun thing we were doing for a while. And I'll get back to that, because there's other stuff happening, which was really fascinating to me. I really we were talking about how many watts per square foot a data center could handle, and it's pitiful. And, looking at it, I'm like, there's got to be a better way. And so I started proposing taking part of our enterprise data center in Convex and building walls around, I don't remember the exact size, but it was maybe like a 30 by 30 data center that I could build and put 18 racks in them with heaters, so that I can go in and test what these best practices that we came up with how much impact would it have if you did it the right way? Because people in general were like, well, we don't know if that makes a difference. And I had no way of telling him, well, if you do hot aisle, cold aisle, it's going to be, you're going to have X amount better performance. We had no clue. And so we tried to model it, and, you know, the modeling, there's so many assumptions you make. And I'm like, I want to build this damn thing.
So you're like a design verification test now. You're like trying to figure out how to make it break or fail?
Well, I wanted to see if it would even work. And then on top of that, at the same time, I was meeting with Ericsson, and they had this overhead cooling system that was natural convection cooling for switch rooms. And I'm looking at it going, wow, this might be a good solution for our Superdome platform. So we were really concerned about whether customers could handle the density of a Superdome platform. And so I'm looking at it going, if I put a fan on that damn thing, a few fans, and force the air where it sucks the hot air in and blows it down into the cold aisle, I could really make, and then it's a short path for the air. It just keeps looping around from behind the rack up to the ceiling, down, and continue this stuff. And I could really prove what it is that freaking density I can do. And then I could prove how much that helps. I could prove how much hot aisle, cold aisle helps, because I have all these 18 racks, 3 rows of 6 with heaters in them. I mean, this is the rudimentary stuff we were looking to do at the time. And I had this lab manager at the time. I went to him, and he's like, no. I go, it'll cost about $1.5 million to build this, and I think we'll learn so much and we could use it for the customers. No. And then the guy, soon after that, it was clear he was not passionate, because it looks like he had his foot out the door. And another director for the lab came in, and I proposed the same thing. And again, this is the lab that does all the high-end computing. They were just interested in building the platforms. And he lasted about another year. And by the way, that's when my patenting started, because then I was looking to patent this overhead idea that we had. And then the next guy was Paul Perez. Paul Perez, I love the guy to this day. We're still friends, and I think he's one of the CTOs at Dell now. He gets announced as the new lab manager 3 days into the job. I'm there. I go into his office, which this just goes to show the first time you get rejected on an idea, don't give up, right? This was another thing I learned. And I go into Paul, I say, look, this is what I want to do. And I'll never forget this to this day. And I love him dearly. And I always quote what he said at that point. He goes, is this disruptive? I go, yeah. And he goes, let's do it.
That's all I needed to know.
That's all he needed to know. And I am, you talk about someone who has a crush for a lifetime on someone. That just made me love him. And I just love the guy to this day. You talk about people that changed that influenced you, or changed, or critical to your career. Paul was critical to my career. And so we built the lab, we spent the money, we tested everything out. We proved that going from hot aisle, or, chaotic designs with everything lined up the same way. If you go hot aisle, cold aisle, we could double the density that we could cool by just simply going hot aisle, cold aisle, which was huge. We were able to do 10x the cooling with overhead cooling, which, by the way, that division of Ericsson, which we were patenting this with jointly, actually sold that division to Emerson. And so if you look at the XDO product line, I actually have Emerson patents while I was at HP, because that XDO product line is the basis of what we were doing at the time. So, it's all interconnected somehow. And
in the best case, if you and I both pumped in $10 billion each personally, you're ready to write a check? So we put that in place, right? And we go with an existing reactor technology that is certified. That's the key. So that means not a
concept or a theoretical one. This is one that's been applied. It's got metrics that we can measure.
So let's call it Westinghouse 300 reactor, or soon there's the Rolls-Royce reactors. Rolls-Royce has 68 active reactors in the world with never an accident. It's great. They're 482 megawatts each. So that'd be kind of the size to be medium modular, really, to make sense for our industry because of the kind of scale. Today, if we went with a fully approved reactor, right? It would be at least 10 years, at least.
Yeah, I agree.
To bring it to life. So now we look at the existential problem of power. I mentioned Georgia before, and this demand that it is impossible to fulfill. How do you deal with the stopgap in between it all? You also have, and you just saw it bubbling up in the last week now, the administration is now like, wait, Bitcoin's bad. Because the price went crazy, right? And then the DOE and everybody else started reporting, and the grid, FERC, and everybody else started reporting, hey, they're doing, Bitcoin specific mining is taking up probably 3% of the grid. Now I think there's going to be, I don't do business with Bitcoin guys. That's great. I believe in blockchain. I'm not a big fan of Bitcoin. It's just a personal thing, but blockchain's amazing. Great technology. We'll be buying real estate with you and I'll touch our phones together and we'll transact a house or something. I mean, that's going to come. But it's going to be really interesting to see if all of a sudden the Bitcoin miners are like, hey, you got to shut down. Go somewhere else. We don't want you here. Now, where are you going to go? You go to Asia. I think there's a new coal plant a week being turned up in Asia right now.
For real.
Oh, yeah. Our coal all of our plants are shutting down. But in, where you have a huge percent of the population between India and China, they're building them like crazy. And they're like, we're not going to stop. We have booming economies. We need to achieve these things. And the only way to do that is coal. But what we're doing is exporting our coal there. So the climate issues, we all forget we're on one planet and the things that go along with it. But we want what we want. We want our phones to work. We want the internet to work. Be it a porn or be it a business or whatever it might be, it's all got to work, right? We need everything to function. Our entire economy relies on that. Now you've got this bursting up of AI. It's a little bubbly. A lot of people pouring a lot of money into a lot of gigawatts of stuff. And I think that if you don't stick to your fundamentals of energy, water, fiber, and land, and you start building to accommodate very specifically around that, and you aren't really looking at the business plans behind that, like is everybody really making money with AI? Are all the billions being pumped in to accommodate that? I say this because I've lived through cycle after cycle after cycle, and if you just stay the course of core infrastructure, it's needed no matter
network connectivity.
It's needed no matter what you do. And then if you start chasing very specific demand sets, if I said my campus was a Bitcoin campus and we sold to a bunch of Bitcoiners, and then the administration pulls the plug on Bitcoin, that who knows? You remember the metaverse?
Sure.
Meta's still losing billions on the metaverse. That metaverse got quiet all of a sudden, right? You stopped hearing about it. Do you remember TikTok and the last administration's goal to force TikTok to and ByteDance to deploy all their infrastructure in the U.S.? That was behind Oracle and ByteDance themselves doing their own stuff. Huge surge, took up all the spare capacity along with Meta's metaverse, but you don't hear about that anymore. That's poof, gone. Now it's all about AI taking up everybody's spare capacity, which was gone already, and then some, and pre-signing for stuff. I don't know what's going to come next. These are just waves, and
I don't know what the fad is. I don't know. You're right. You're spot on those, like how the cycles are up and down in terms of what is consistent and inconsistent. But over the course of time, if you track every industrial revolution to now, the first industrial revolution gave us steam power. The second gave us electricity as well as the motor car. The third gave us nuclear power, which we developed actually in a 55-year gap. There was a 55-year gap between the second and the third industrial revolution. Mm-hmm. In that gap, we had 4 wars. We had World War I, then we had Prohibition, mm-hmm. Then we had the Great Depression, and then we had World War II, and then we had Korea, and then Vietnam. So there's a less of an industrial revolution during those really, really downtrodden times where we have major wars. But when we came back to it, we had another form of energy, which was nuclear, and then we had a lot of issues with nuclear. But nuclear was mainstream for a bit there, right? Mm-hmm. And then in the fourth industrial revolution, we did get more power. We just got it from quantum computing, and we got it from AI and AR and VR and all the other cool things that come with that.
We're in a technology revolution now.
We sure as shit are. It started at the end of COVID, so in 2020, we really started the fifth industrial revolution. And what you and I are talking about is proof of what it is. And that's where we have a more harmonious relationship with the technology in our life and the machines in our lives, because the unintended consequences of those previous ones, like you said, are gross pollution, right? And I remember reading a paper when I was in college where it was the CTO of China, and he goes, how do you feel about the CTO of like Dell saying, yeah, we outsource all of our manufacturing to China? He goes, that's just what the Americans think. We outsource all of our marketing to America. We're an industrial
country that's built on building things. You know what I'm saying? But the optics are changing based on which way you view it, right? For us, we've gotten power in every industrial revolution. I think what I believe is going to happen in this fifth industrial revolution is AI, and the demand for it, like you said, it's bubbly, but it's prevalent and it isn't going anywhere. And you talk to anybody and they're going to tell you that it's going to be 10x of what cloud demand was. And we don't even have enough power to support cloud demand today.
More than 10x. I mean,
let's just say conservatively.
There's 60 to 100 gigawatts. And it's funny when I talk to luminaries of our industry, more business people, luminaries, not nerds, but the business side, they're like, I don't believe it. 8 out of 10. I'm not joking. They're like, it's not really true. That's all, and then yet we're seeing companies saying, I'm spending 60 billion this year on it. I'm spending this and that. And I forgot what somebody just reported 34 billion. It's crazy numbers.
The missing part though, but you were almost onto it when you're asking me if I had my 10 billion and you had your 10 billion, but it doesn't take you or me. I think one, the adoption rate of emerging technologies will never slow down, but the pent-up demand for more will only put more constraint on the very highly constrained power solution that exists not only for our industry, but for other commercial or industrial industries.
How do you start to look at liquid cooling from a completely... Air cooling is limited.
Yep.
Period. There's no way that you're going to be able to support an advanced AI architecture. V100s, quite possibly so. But if you're starting to go with A and H100 architectures, a full rack of H100s, full stop.
Well, let's dive into that just a little bit so that, you talk about people on the infrastructure, power, and cooling side, without getting into the total physics of it, which is definitely above my pay grade, is like, why is that, right? Like, you can only move heat with air so quickly away from something that generates heat.
Right.
And the generation of things that we're installing in data centers today is the equivalent of taking a Weber grill, turning all 4 burners on high, and sticking it in a data center. That's the amount of heat we're talking about.
Oh my God. I just got I
right. So put 3
cooking with gas.
Right. Go. Put 3 grand Tetons, which is the Meta, public open source name for their 8-chip GPU sled. Put 2 or 3 of those in a rack multiple times over. That's a lot of Weber grills.
I'm consuming a silly amount of power.
Plus the water that is used to cool that, to reject it. That's where you're going probably, right?
Yeah, and just like the funny things that we think about, like teaching our kids to turn off the faucet when they're brushing their teeth or turn off a light when you leave the room. Yeah, and these are things like I feel guilty when I don't do it, but then I'm like Googling all day or I'm streaming content and I'm not even thinking about it. It's like this wall of disbelief of, what the digital usage of electricity and water is. And so when you were saying about what can we do as people, I think, Dean, you're talking about the demand that we can't stop, like people aren't going to not do something that helps them earn revenue for their business. And you talking about the lack of power, like we can't build power fast enough. So the people inside need to think about how to do it smarter, how to like turn that faucet off, how to turn that light switch off. And I think a lot of it is, yes, liquid cooling is needed for some of the latest generations of chips because air can't cool them. But also, why are we still using air at such great scale? I mean, it's 40% of a data center's energy use. Like, let's be thoughtful about how we're using the power so that either we use less power and don't, burn the earth to the ground. Well, there won't be ground, but, or thinking about reallocating it. So like there's other demands for the compute. So take the power from the cooling and give it to the compute. I think that's, how we need to think more creatively. And, this morning on NPR, we're like seconds to midnight on they were talking about COP28 and we're seconds to midnight on stopping the 1.5 degree climate, warming. And it's just like, we're really at a bad place and data centers can make a big impact. Like we're in an industry that can help a lot.
If you're just telling them everything to do, they're never going to learn. Yeah. So you got to get this comfort level, right? You got to get this comfort level to let them make mistakes without crashing the ship or the boat or whatever they're doing, if that makes sense. And I think as a leader, that has taught me to allow people to make mistakes, but make mistakes that aren't irreparable or that we can't go back and fix.
Sure.
Right. So, if I got a sales manager now or a young operator, and I can see, I wouldn't do that, but like, is it going to harm anything? No, you let them work through it, and allow them to make that mistake. So, that's one thing. And then just having good mentors. Those 2 guys are great. you know, and I feel like I taught them as much as they taught me because, you know, they had a lot of experience on me, you know, it's, you know, just your crusty old chief and in your first class.
Well, that's their job too, is to grow and train JMOs, you know, junior military. Like when you come out, you know enough to know hopefully that you don't know shit. And then some senior NCO will come up and teach you some shit. Right. Yeah. And that's the way the military has always raised their own.